focus on foreign policy. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo gives an update on the worldwide priorities for President Donald Trump. Troop withdrawal. A lawmaker weighs in on the Trump administration's removal of U.S. military personnel from Syria. Pro-life laws. We have analysis from the United Kingdom as Northern Ireland legalizes abortion. And nothing personal. The Vatican fixes a bug in its new Rosary app. We'll explain. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, October 22nd, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. President Donald Trump triggers outrage by comparing the Democrat-led impeachment inquiry to a lynching. Democrats are still pushing forward with their investigation, and today they questioned a key witness. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi brings us the latest. Jason?
Wyatt, Democrats inside that hearing say the testimony is disturbing. Now, Republicans say the whole process is unfair against the president. In fact, last night they tried to censure House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff. That failed on a party line vote. President Trump is taking aim against this impeachment investigation, using a word that brings up torture and murder.
This is a phony investigation.
It's not new for President Trump to slam this impeachment probe.
It's so illegitimate.
But today he added a new word, tweeting, "All Republicans must remember what they are witnessing here, a lynching." Democrats criticized the word choice.
Whenever his back is against the wall, a racial bomb is what we know of him to throw.
You think this is racist?
I mean, I think it's consistent. Why would you use the term lynching? Why would you say that?
Republican Lindsey Graham says Democrats aren't giving the president the chance to defend himself.
Yeah, this is a lynching in every sense. This is un-American.
He says the whole House needs to vote to start the impeachment investigation.
Republicans say the abuse of power is that it wasn't initiated by the entire House chamber, which has happened in the past.
There is no requirement, no rule whatsoever that it has to be initiated by the House as a whole.
Texas Republican John Cornyn says he wouldn't have used the word lynching, but he says Democrats are dividing the country.
Well, the impeachment inquiry is secret, and it's apparently underway behind closed doors. This is not the way it should be run.
Impeachment interviews take place behind these closed doors. Investigators today questioned Bill Taylor, the man in charge of the embassy in Ukraine. In September, he texted, "I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign." The ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, responded, "Bill, I believe you are incorrect about President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind. The president is trying to evaluate whether Ukraine is truly going to adopt transparency and reforms."
And Taylor says that this is actually Taylor shedding light on President Trump and Ukraine. That's the whole reason that sparked this impeachment investigation. President Trump asking Ukraine's president to investigate Joe Biden's son. Wyatt?
And it's still sparking fierce debate. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. Iraq's military says U.S. troops entering their country after withdrawing from Syria do not have permission to stay. The statement appears to contradict Defense Secretary Mark Esper. He says all American troops leaving Syria will go to western Iraq and continue to conduct operations against ISIS. Esper says he plans to talk to Iraqi leaders tomorrow to work out the details. He adds the U.S. has no plans to have those troops stay in Iraq for longer than necessary. Joining me now from Capitol Hill to offer his perspective is Congressman Michael Walt, Republican from Florida and member of the House Armed Services Committee. Congressman, welcome into the broadcast. You're able to look at what's going on in Syria from a unique perspective. You're a Green Beret who served multiple combat tours around the world. You've also served as both the Defense Policy Director, Counterterrorism Advisor. When you think about all that, you call this decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria a strategic mistake. What's at risk here?
Well, I want to say that I'm encouraged by reports of the president rethinking leaving a ground presence in Syria. Here's why that's so important. Number one, first and foremost, we have to prevent the return of ISIS 2.0, so to speak, because that problem will follow us home. We cannot repeat the mistakes of President Obama, who pulled out of Iraq too soon. That led to the creation of ISIS in the first place, and it followed us home. And we saw attacks all over Europe and inspired attacks all over the United States. The reason that hasn't happened in the last few years, the president rightly took the shackles off the military, destroyed the caliphate, but now we have to stay on offense, keep our foot on their neck, and as long as they're worried about staying alive abroad, they can't plan and plot to attack the United States at home. I understand frustration with the length of these wars and how difficult they are, but the terrorists are at war with us, and they won't stop just because we pull out. So I'm encouraged to see the president rethinking, keeping a small, I have to remind folks, this isn't tens of thousands of troops. It's a few hundred that work with our local allies, backed by our Air Force, to keep ISIS and those other terrorist groups on the defensive.
Okay, so let me just follow up with you on that in a more general sense. What do you think is the U.S. responsibility when it comes to keeping a military presence in the Middle East in general? Do we have one? Should we have one?
Well, we do have one, and I think we should have one because, what this really is a question of is about United States leadership. And, I can tell you when the United States doesn't lead, it creates a vacuum, and I don't want the Russians, the Chinese, terrorist groups, or others filling that void. There are ways to do this with a very small footprint of special operations forces working by, with, and through locals that, eventually over time, we will train and assist them to take care of security on their own. But for the meantime, we have to stay on offense. We can't repeat the mistakes of Obama. We can't just wish these wars away because we're frustrated, and we have to lead. And only the United States can do that. I absolutely agree with the president that our partners and allies need to share in the burden in a meaningful way, but they have to do that with U.S. leadership.
You mentioned Russia earlier. Turkey's President Erdogan and Russia's President Vladimir Putin met today. What are your thoughts about the roles Turkey and Russia are playing as the situation develops?
Well, we have to keep in mind that Erdogan is at fault for this invasion. I've talked to the Secretary of Defense, to the National Security Advisor in the White House and others. They told Erdogan repeatedly, including the president, not to do this, that we would create and help them maintain this safe zone in line with their interests, working with the Kurds, but Erdogan did it anyway. He invaded into Syria. The president made the decision to pull our troops back, but what I'm encouraged is he's still looking at keeping a presence in northern Syria. We have to keep in mind that Iran is also trying to fill the vacuum there and fill the void to be able to create a second front against our allies in Israel. They want to be able to attack Israel from both Syria and Lebanon, working with Hezbollah, their terrorist allies there. So it's important that the United States keeps a presence, stays engaged, has leverage, and eventually, hopefully, we can drive all of the actors there to the negotiating table for some type of peaceful resolution. In the meantime, Russia wants to fill the void to create and expand its presence in the Middle East. It gets confusing, but at the end of the day, I think where the U.S. interest really lies is in keeping a foot on the neck of ISIS, not allowing it to resurge and reform again, working with the Kurds who are guarding these prison camps that so many ISIS fighters and leaders are still detained in.
Fair to say there are a lot of moving pieces in the Middle East, and long have been. We appreciate you breaking it down for us and giving your thoughts. Congressman Michael Walt, Republican from Florida and member of the House Armed Services Committee, thanks so much.
All right, thank you.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo includes conversations about abortion and religious liberty in his approach to foreign policy. The secretary outlined challenges around the globe when he spoke today to a group of conservatives. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Wyatt, Secretary Pompeo said Turkey hurt the fight against ISIS when it invaded Syria, and two other topics stood out in his speech: religious liberty and abortion.
Please join me in welcoming my friend and America's Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo defended unborn babies today. He applauded a U.S.-sponsored document first announced at the United Nations.
Rejecting the claim that abortion is a human right.
The secretary says the Trump administration will continue to fight for religious liberty around the world.
We've done our best to call out the absence of religious liberty in countries all across the world.
Some faith-based groups were concerned when President Trump removed U.S. troops from northern Syria, opening the way for Turkey's attack on the Kurds. The Secretary of State defended the president's decision, but was critical of Turkey's advance.
That it was not in Turkey's interest as a NATO ally to continue with that incursion. The truth was that our invasion set back our shared fight against ISIS.
Pompeo says the success of the outcome in northern Syria is yet to be determined. The White House says the president wants to remain true to his goal of bringing U.S. troops home.
But he also wants to ensure stability in the region. He wants the de-escalation to stay where it is now. The ceasefire is working. We're hoping it becomes permanent. But the fact is you have to keep some people over there.
And looking ahead, Secretary Pompeo admitted solutions to foreign policy challenges like the one in North Korea won't come easy.
The truth is that we can't rely on failed strategies to convince Chairman Kim to give up his nuclear weapons. There's still much work to be done, and the truth is that we won't achieve peace and reconciliation in Afghanistan without every party at the table.
And on the northeastern Syria border, Russia and Turkey agreed to patrol that border, and that comes after the withdrawal of U.S. and Kurdish troops from that border. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. British lawmakers reject a fast-track timetable for Brexit. It makes an exit by October 31st all but impossible. Earlier, Prime Minister Boris Johnson remained hopeful a deal could be reached.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With your permission, I beg to move that the bill be read a second time.
Johnson now says he will pause the government's planned Brexit legislation. He also rebuked lawmakers for voting to delay the exit again. The national referendum was held in 2016. At least 3 people, including 2 toddlers, are injured in Norway after a man stole an ambulance and drove it on the sidewalk. Police in Oslo say they stopped the man by firing at the vehicle's tires. A 32-year-old man was arrested. Inside the stolen ambulance, police found an Uzi submachine gun, a shotgun, and a large amount of drugs. Authorities have not released a motive, but they have not ruled out terrorism. Around 700 refugees arrive at a port town in Greece as the country struggles to cope with a surge in new arrivals. The government is promising to toughen the asylum application procedure for migrants. Greece has received more than 25,000 asylum seekers and migrants, most coming into the country via Turkey from the Middle East. A top Vatican administrator is denying the Holy See is on the verge of financial ruin. Archbishop Nunzio Galantino says all that is needed is a spending review to bring down costs. A new book alleges the Vatican is at risk of a default and is operating at an $80 million deficit. Bishops taking part in the Synod on the Amazon are asking for solidarity.
It is a special synod for a special region, but it has universal consequences, and there is a great urgency. We don't have much time to lose because the increase, let's say, of 5% deforestation in the Amazon, we only have 10 years left, and that is before we get to move.
The bishop of a diocese in the South American country of Suriname expressed the need to save the region's natural resources. The Synod is discussing how the Catholic Church can best evangelize and form the people in the Amazon while maintaining their unique culture.
There is several propositions, and one that was made is the new right for Amazon. I think that this can be a very important moment for evangelization because the right, the Amazon right, will be a true and genuine expression of the enculturation. So if we don't take in serious way the enculturation, we could not understand how to do new evangelization.
Archbishop Rino Fisichella is the president of the Vatican's Council for Promoting the New Evangelization. He's participating in the Synod and told EWTN News Nightly there is free, open dialogue among bishops. He adds the key focus has been evangelization in the Amazon. Coming up, Northern Ireland legalizes abortion. We have reaction from the UK. And an update on the health of former President Jimmy Carter. As of midnight, abortion is now legal in Northern Ireland. British lawmakers voted last year on the issue, but has not taken effect until today. In addition, same-sex marriage will become legal in January. Pro-lifers in Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK are voicing their concern. Joining me now by Skype from Oxford, England, to talk about all the impact of this is Dr. Callum Miller. He's both a registered medical doctor and a research associate at the University of Oxford. Dr. Miller, welcome in. Previously, abortion was legally permitted in Northern Ireland only if the mother's life was at risk or if there was some risk of permanent serious damage to her mental or physical health. What does this new law permit? In other words, how far does this go?
Yes, well, this is an astonishingly radical law because it basically makes Northern Ireland perhaps the most radical abortion law in the entirety of Europe, despite being one of the most pro-life countries in the population in Europe. And so it has basically legalized abortion on demand for any reason, including sex-selective abortion, any disability, no matter how minor, up to 28 weeks, which is 6 weeks beyond viability, and basically puts North Ireland much nearer to only a few countries in the world who allow it up to the kind of third trimester of pregnancy, like China and North Korea. So it's a profoundly radical law that's been imposed on them.
Very alarming for sure. I want to give a little bit of background for our viewers about how we got to this moment, to this point. Northern Ireland is part of the UK, but it has its own government. The problem is that government collapsed in 2017 and has been suspended for more than 2.5 years amid its own political dispute. So lawmakers in the UK Parliament passed the abortion and the same-sex marriage laws for Northern Ireland. So my question for you is, what's the reaction been among the people of Northern Ireland to these laws where they weren't even allowed to vote for it?
I mean, it's been very remarkable. I mean, it's essentially been an excuse of the Northern Ireland Assembly not having met for a couple of years, which of course is a problem. But this has really been used as an excuse for what is essentially British imperialism, forcing this radical law on the people of Northern Ireland with not even a consultation. And I think it was about 17 minutes of actual debate on the law. So it's an amazingly colonialist move from the British Parliament. The public, of course, have been outraged at this. There was a protest of about 20,000 people at the Northern Irish Assembly buildings. People in the kind of Northern Irish government have been saying that they have received more correspondence on this issue than any other issue ever, which in Northern Ireland is quite a profound claim to make. And really, the polling consistently has shown that the Northern Irish people oppose this. Every sitting Northern Irish MP in Westminster opposed it. And really, there has been no call from within Northern Ireland for this. So quite rightly, the people are outraged, not just at this radical abortion kind of colonialism, but the fact that it was specifically done over their heads without speaking to people and consulting the people of Northern Ireland.
What has a Christian reaction been like?
Well, the Christian reaction has, for the most part, been very encouraging. So the Christians have been at the forefront of the campaign and have done an amazing job, really. We cannot fault the churches in Northern Ireland and the campaigning. They've done an incredible job there. But of course, Northern Ireland is gradually becoming less Christian, and there are some people in Northern Ireland who are fine with these laws. Probably the most kind of radical example of this is within nationalist parts of the country and the nationalist parties. Sinn Féin, for example, the kind of foremost nationalist party within Northern Ireland, traditionally a very Catholic voting base, has basically encouraged and allowed this imperialist move to go in. And so really they've betrayed their voter base, they've betrayed the people of Northern Ireland. And I think quite rightly their Catholic voting base is quite outraged at them. And I think we'll be looking to other parties who will actually vote for life and vote for their values as Catholics.
So important for pro-lifers all around the world, not just in Northern Ireland, but across Europe, to stand up and vote for life. Dr. Callum Miller, Research Associate at the University of Oxford, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Former President Jimmy Carter is in the hospital after falling in his Georgia home. The 95-year-old suffered a minor pelvic fracture. Doctors expect him to recover, and reports indicate he's still in good spirits. It marks the second time this month the former president has been injured in a fall. Carter is the oldest living president. Up next, analysis of Canada's elections and what the results mean for the faithful. And the Vatican fixes an issue with its newest Rosary app. Today, the church honors St. John Paul II on his feast day. He was born in Poland in 1920. In 1978, he became the first non-Italian pope in more than 4 centuries and was pope for 27 years. Pope Francis canonized him in 2014. Life is getting worse for a lot of people in Venezuela as the result of the country's economic crisis. People now are using food and cigarettes to buy gas. One man says he has no cash and instead pays by using a package of cornmeal. Due to hyperinflation, the country's paper currency is hard to find. These are just the latest signs the South American nation of roughly 30 million people is in a deepening downturn. Justin Trudeau wins a second term as Prime Minister of Canada, but he fails to gain a majority in Parliament. Trudeau's Liberal Party took most of the seats in Parliament, but fell short of the 170 needed for a majority. It means Liberal members will need help from the opposition to pass legislation. Trudeau defeated Andrew Scheer, a pro-life Catholic, but Scheer's Conservative Party won more raw votes nationally. Joining us now via Skype from Ottawa with his reaction to the Canadian elections is Father Deacon Andrew Bennett, director of the Cardus Religious Freedom Institute. He's an Eastern Rite Catholic deacon. Deacon Andrew, welcome into the show. Was this result a surprise, or did Canadians expect Trudeau to win a second term?
Thanks, Wyatt. I don't think it was particularly a surprise. If we look at where the parties stood at the dissolution of Parliament some 40 days ago, they were very close in terms of the impending popular vote, probably each around 32% in terms of many of the polls that were coming forward at that time. And oddly, for a Canadian election, the two main parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives, held at that 32 to 33% support right through to the very end of the campaign. And so I think everybody expected there would be some sort of minority government. And so for the Liberals to win a minority, it did not come as a large surprise, but there were some other surprises along the way.
I mentioned earlier Trudeau's opponent, Conservative Andrew Scheer, is pro-life. What role did abortion play in the campaign?
It was used at various times to, I would say, demonize Mr. Scheer. Mr. Scheer is a devout Catholic. His father is actually a deacon here in Ottawa. And Mr. Scheer stipulated that he would not reopen the abortion debate in Canada, but that he was pro-life. And this came out in the debate when Mr. Trudeau called Mr. Scheer on his pro-life views. And Mr. Scheer said, Mr. Trudeau, there are millions of people in this country that have pro-life views, and they don't all need to believe what you believe. So I think he did certainly stand up for that, but there was a certain tinge of sort of anti-Catholicism in the campaign, which was certainly very distasteful. And this was commented on by a number of leading Canadian columnists and commentators as we went through the campaign.
During his victory speech, Prime Minister Trudeau talked about Canadians voting in favor of his party's progressive agenda. What does that mean for religious freedom in Canada?
Well, I think one thing to note is that the Liberals did not win the popular vote. The popular vote went in favor of the Conservatives by almost 300,000 votes, separating the two main parties. The Prime Minister uses language like progressive values quite a bit, and certainly if we look at the last Parliament and the previous government that he led, there were a number of attempts to stifle religious freedom and public faith in the country. The Canada Summer Jobs fiasco, where the government sought to restrict the ability of faith-based organizations to receive government funding for hiring summer students in the summer, university students, college students, if they supported views that did not jive with the government's views. And so there was an attestation that an applicant would have to check that would basically say, I support pro-abortion views, I support same-sex marriage, LGBTQ rights, and so forth. And so that was sort of a low watermark, I would say, for the previous government, the Liberal government, in terms of religious freedom. It remains to be seen, Wyatt, what this next government will look like. The Liberals do not have a majority in Parliament. There are 5 parties represented in the Canadian Parliament, so very different from the United States Congress. 5 parties, and the Liberals will need the support of certainly at least one of those parties to govern and to get legislation through. And it's most likely they will look to the New Democratic Party, which is a social democratic party, and they are also avowedly pro-abortion.
Well, it was a big night for Canadians and a lot to consider as Canadians move forward with their government. Father Deacon Andrew Bennett, director of the Cardus Religious Freedom Institute, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Finally tonight, the Vatican has an update on its new Rosary app. Officials say they have fixed a bug that would have let hackers access the user's personal information. The Rosary allows people to track their prayers, find spiritual resources, and connect with an online prayer community. The device, which is about $110, activates when a user makes the sign of the cross. Sign of the times. Even the church has to provide updates and bug fixes to stop potential hackers. Well, that wraps up our newscast for tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.